what's going through your mind while you're preparing to get married? And I assume it's an arranged marriage. You said you don't know the person.
I was not excited about it at all. I was terrified. Nothing about it felt like good to me. I was grossed out and very turned off by the whole thing. Although like that's very specific to me. I have talked to other girls or women who say that for them it was very exciting and they couldn't wait for sex with their husbands. For me, it was like, this is a stranger. I barely know him. Men in general, I was just really turned off by men. And also a separate piece that might be specific to me is that I had been sleeping with girls for several years at that point. And so I didn't understand though that what I was doing with girls was the same act as the thing that was going to happen in marriage, just with different anatomy. To me, it was like, I have this intimacy with girls and I love it. And we just love each other so much and like touching each other. And when I get married, there's this very specific act I need to do with my husband that is about his pleasure. They were not related things to me. Like I didn't have language for the thing I was doing with the girls. So like, it just felt like this other thing that was like not exciting, not hot.
Yeah. That brings up an interesting point around not knowing that they were comparable. And the thing that I can relate to is I was never explained what masturbation was for women. I just always knew that that's a guy thing and don't do it and it's wrong and sinful and whatever. And then once I figured out what it was, I was like, oh yeah, I've done that before. I had no idea that I had been sinning this whole time. And was it similar to you? Do you think if you would have explained what you had done with other women that you would have been punished for it or looked down on for it? And did that ever happen? Did you ever tell anyone what you had been doing?
So I absolutely would have gotten in trouble for it. I did get in trouble for it at summer camp one year. The director of the camp called me into her office and told me, you're not allowed to be kissing girls. And I don't know who ratted me out, but that was the framing. Like you can't be kissing girls. And I was like, oh, okay. But I knew it was bad. I knew it was immodest, you know, and that it felt shamey and wrong in that sense. But if I had been sleeping with boys as a teenager, I would have been like absolutely punished and, you know, it would have been seen as cardinal sin. So it's interesting. It's almost like this weird loophole because women's sexuality, it doesn't exist. Like we're just not seen as sexual beings. And so it's like, that's not right. It's dirty and bodies should be hidden and shameful, but not you're like having a sexual act outside of marriage level shameful.
Oh, that's so interesting. In Mormonism and most other Christian denominations, being gay is seen as an abomination towards God. But if you're saying that sexuality didn't necessarily exist for women, did they view what you were doing as the same serious type of sin, or is being gay a sin, an abomination to God in your religion?
Being gay is an abomination to God in my religion for men. For men.
Okay.
For women, it's actually interesting because nobody talks about it. It's just not a thing that's even addressed. Not gay men either. Like none of it is talked about. I only learned about the fact that being gay is a sin after I left the community. When I was in it, there was just nobody mentioned it at all. But when I was questioning, like after my divorce and my struggle to figure out like what's next for me, there was a period where I was trying so hard to figure out how do I stay within Judaism and still be true to myself. And I reached out to this rabbi who was actually like a modern Orthodox rabbi because I knew I can't even ask this of a Hasidic rabbi. But I was like, maybe a modern Orthodox rabbi will give me some, sense of like permission to be myself and remain in Orthodoxy. And the rabbi said, no, I'm not allowed to be pursuing, a sexual relationship with a woman, and it's forbidden. And I was like, well, then what does God want from me? He said, God wants you to be celibate for the rest of your life. If that's the only way you can get sexual pleasure, you should just be celibate.
That makes me so angry. And that's the same for Mormonism. They're like, oh no, we accept gay people. You just can't be gay. It's like, wait, what? Like, you can't act on it. You just have to get married, force yourself into a straight marriage, and have children because that's what God wants for you. So, were you okay? I'm going back a little bit. We're kind of popcorning, which is great to get a broader scope of everything. So, when you are having these sexual experiences with women and now you're being forced to marry a man that you don't know, how how did you feel when all of that was going on? Like during your wedding and after the wedding and the things that you're expected to do, what's going through your mind and how are you rectifying this?
It was such a difficult time for me. And, like as time passes, I like discover new layers of what that actually felt like for me. I think I was just a zombie in it all. I was like
Mm-hmm.
just, kind of going through the motions, and feeling really detached from myself. But it was a really bad time. When I got married, like I said, my husband, I had met him like twice for an hour each time before being engaged to him. And in those conversations, it was just like him telling me like stories from the Torah, or like what the weekly Torah portion was about, or like what he was studying in yeshiva. It was not like a
Mm-hmm.
human conversation. And then, I was told that we should get engaged. Specifically, like after the first time I met him, my father asked me, so do you like him? Do you like him? And I said, no. And he said, okay.
Oh no.
And I went back to the sleepaway camp I was at, with all the girls I was kissing. And my father called me up and said, would you do me a favor and just meet him one more time for me? And I was like, okay. Came home, did the whole thing again. My father asked me, do you like him? I said no. And he said, well, do you respect him? And I said, yes. He seems to be a very good Torah scholar. And my
Mm-hmm.
father said, respect is enough and you'll learn to like him. And
Ooh.
we were engaged. And, 6 months later, we got married without having like any like conversations or, any real connection in between. And on the wedding night, I was expected to have sex with him.
Yeah.
And not only, was it my first time having sex with him, who was a virtual stranger to me, but it was my first time being like intimate with a man,
Yeah.
period. And because of like modesty culture, there was just so little exposure to like men and boys in general. Even my own brothers, like I just didn't know men.
Mm-hmm.
The boys are in yeshiva all day. They're like living this very separate life from their sisters. And so it was like so many layers of like shock for me,
Yeah.
to be this intimate with a person with who's a man.